Welcome back to Capital Connection. David Costa, Dean of Robert Kennedy College, joins us now from Zurich. David, thanks very much for coming on the show. I know it's an interesting start to the week when we look at the Asian trade, but the kind of comments that we've been getting out of Europe, very typical, very different voices. Are we getting some sort of sense that once again the ECB is being put in a corner and they'll have no choice but to capitulate to the market?
Good morning to you. Yes, we are now in a very acute phase of this crisis, and there are a lot of restrictions of using this fund, and even if the fund will be increased, there is no time. Because we're running out of time, in my view, the only institution that could make a difference now with some sort of firewalling or even saying a wall of money is the ECB, because it's the only institution which could act without going through the long and complex process to get all the governments of the EU members agreeing to the new plan. So yes, I think the ECB is in the corner and they have to take action quickly because that's what the market expects.
Giving the market what it expects, David, seems to be something that we're not capable of doing 100%. We give a little in terms of what the ECB or the EU does and then take 5 steps backwards. In the meantime, do we manage to just sit back and not do anything, sit on cash, or do we try and get into this market, do a little bit of bargain hunting, and where do we do that?
Well, it depends pretty much on what the theory of the investor is at this stage. My theory is that a solution will come. Maybe it will come later than expected. There will be some more pain ahead. But we have so many interesting valuations. At this point, it doesn't even make sense to name a sector in Europe because every sector is pretty much undervalued. That it is a good buying opportunity. But volatility ahead is to be expected because, as you said, we won't see a strong reaction of the ECB in the next few days. More pain ahead, especially looking at what the Troika report will be like, and we know there is no plan B. So if the report doesn't look so great, then perhaps the ECB will have to do something faster.
David, in the past, you've always been a big proponent of gold, a very big fan, to be honest, and a lot of your calls have turned out to be true. Now, in light of the recent sell-off, has that dented your appetite for gold?
Not really, because I see gold as a fraction of a portfolio and held physically. So I don't see gold as a short-term speculation. I see it as a currency. And I'm pretty much convinced that for those people that are not yet having any allocation to gold, this is a good entry point. And any entry point really to the 1,500 and something, early 1,600 is a good entry point for the long term, of course, because in the short term there is now a forced liquidation, a lot of speculation, especially since the increase of the margins that we have seen on Friday are being washed out of the market. So there is turbulence ahead, has to be expected, some more volatility. So that's quite normal. But for the long-term investor, gold, like for central banks, will remain a good bet, especially when central banks are still net buyers.
Yeah, okay, so we'll keep an eye on gold as well, at least at some point for entry. You also talk about Armageddon-proof multinationals as being great buys, especially in the European market. You know, even amid the most super attractive valuations, we do need to factor in that the world growth is coming to a very slowing speed. How would you advise investors?
Well, I think many of those Armageddon-proof multinationals have already priced in some of the possible consequences of really the worst-case scenario. So even if that happens, those are still plays that, especially high dividend payers, where an investor will have to be at some stage, especially seeing that in any case there will be some more money printing going around in Europe, because in a way or another that is required. So both gold and some of those multinationals, which are more bulletproof, I would say, are good investment. You cannot keep your portfolio entirely in cash because even if in the short term it looks very defensive, in the long term you might be set for a big surprise.
David, you've talked us through in great detail as to what needs to be done when it comes to the Eurozone debt crisis to really prevent a further contagion and a worsening fallout, if you will. But do you think that they can actually achieve what you're saying?
Well, I think the first priority has to be to restore the credibility of the banking sector in Europe. So there has to be some measure, which I think that is really competence of the ECB, to establish some extraordinary line of credit or some sort of signal to say we are here and none of the banks in the main economy. We have seen some of the French banks, German banks across the board being really penalized. So that is an action which could be taken and probably will have to be taken. And I really see logically that the situation has to be solved, otherwise it would really be even more expensive to sort the mess afterward, as it happened within the case of Lehman, than just doing something now. So I know, yes, it's painful to do something now, and politicians will take time, but I have some more hopes for the ECB, from the ECB front.
David, the situation, I would say, is a very different one from Lehman Brothers, but what would it take, say, for example, from the United States to divert attention, because this market tends to behave like this is a tennis match? Are we going to get something out of the U.S. that could divert attention, start pumping up the equity markets to an extent, or are we going to continue to stay focused on a situation that doesn't have a short-term solution?
But it is possible. Actually, the U.S. market behaved very, very well in the last week. So it's trying to shrug off some of those European worries, but more or less it's really struggling to move higher. Obviously, if we had some positive data from the U.S., something surprising, that will certainly divert attention, at least from the U.S. chunk of the market, to the European problems. But still, the markets are very much interconnected. So in the long term, unless we find a solution in Europe, the U.S. market might distract the attention for a short period of time, but in the long term the markets are now too correlated, too interconnected to be able to say we have a good situation or a relatively less bad situation in the US to make us forget what happens in Europe.
Well, the negatives of becoming a small global world, David. All right, thanks very much for that. David Costa, the Dean of Robert Kennedy College, joining us from Zurich. In the meantime, a general election due in Poland.